Let's put all that to one side. So, very good morning to Peter Hitchens. Peter, nice to see you.
Morning, yes.
Are you suffering jet lag?
A little bit, but because I'm one of the very few people in the world who understands this business of putting clocks forward, I have been practicing for it for some days, going to bed early and getting up early.
You are now...
It wasn't too bad this morning.
Yeah, you are now inextricably linked with every time the clocks go forward.
Well, I don't mind this.
I like it. I really like it.
It's a struggle against stupidity. People do things so often because they've always done them.
Yes.
They won't think about them when challenged, and they get quite cross when challenged. But this is a completely stupid thing, which we totally do not need to do. The Scientific American currently, I've tweeted this out a lot in the past couple of days, has an article in it explaining that research now shows that the day after the clocks go forward, and for some days afterwards, people have heart attacks, they have industrial and road accidents, they fail to turn up for appointments, they're mistake prone. It is actually National Jet Lag Week. People don't grasp it on the Sunday morning when it's immediately happened, because most people don't go to work on Sunday, so they have a respite. But as soon as Monday morning kicks in, people realise that they've had robbed of an hour of sleep.
How is it different from just going to bed an hour later? But it is different from that, isn't it? Because lots of people say go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning instead of midnight, or 11 o'clock instead of 10, and that has no effect on them. But if suddenly the clock
I don't know whether it has an effect on them or not. It has an effect on me if I go to bed later than usual. Perhaps that's because I'm so fantastically old. But I seem to remember always suffered if I've had less sleep than I want to have. Most people do. Sleep is an incredibly valuable part of life and health. But no, it's not. The difference is that everybody's made to do it at once, and they're made to do it. If your employer had said to you last Friday, sent out a memo to everybody, on Monday morning, come in an hour earlier.
Yeah.
You said, what?
Exactly.
You'd have assumed your employer had gone mad. You might well have not obeyed. But when the government effectively does the same thing by jamming the clocks forward forcibly on Saturday night, then everybody does as they're told. And then they say, gosh, the day's so much lighter. Well, actually, I have to break it to you, it isn't. There's exactly the same amount of light as there was before.
Yeah.
It's just the clock has deceived you into thinking that it's in a different...
But it seems as though it's lighter into the evening.
Not if you got up at 6 o'clock this morning, it doesn't.
Well, luckily I didn't get up that early.
Well, I did, and it was dark.
Was it?
Which it has not been for several weeks until now.
But I actually quite like it dark in the morning.
Well, I like it or not like it.
I prefer it lighter in the evening.
The thing is, what the normal person does, if you like getting up early in the morning, get up early in the morning. If you like going to bed late at night, go to bed late at night. If you're really so anxious to have more time in the evening when there's daylight, then arrange with your employers to start work an hour earlier and leave an hour earlier. I'm sure most employers would be delighted, but don't make me get up an hour earlier. Don't make millions of other people do it, because what's the point? So the origin of this, it goes back even further than Kaiser Bill.
Does it?
There was a man called William Willett. He had a supporter in New Zealand, a strange bug-hunting eccentric. Well, this man, William Willett, was a housing developer. He became very rich, and he used to love getting up extremely early and riding around the suburbs that he built on his horse.
Oh, yes.
And he would be infuriated by the fact that all the people whose houses he'd built were asleep. And so he thought the thing to do was to make them wake up early. So he began this campaign to move the clocks forward. Nobody paid any attention until 1916, when, as I say, Kaiser Bill, in a panic about the danger of losing the war, said, right, everybody in the whole German Empire will get up an hour earlier as from tomorrow. So they all did.
And so his way of making them do that is to move the time.
But then the British government copied it.
Yeah.
And of course, the Germans then went and lost the war, as they so often do, and so
it didn't even work.
No, it didn't work, but it persisted.
But since then, of course, we've had all manner of explanations. For example, when I was growing up, I used to be told it was because of Scotland, because they didn't want their children going to school in the morning or coming home from school in the afternoon in the dark. I can attest to this, that when you live in Scotland, it's quite possible for you not to see daylight at all in the winter, because it's that dark.
If the clocks are jammed forward in the winter, which we did in the 60s, of course, it's very bad in northern and indeed southern latitudes. Those who remember the 1960s experiment will tell you the tales of winters spent going to school in the dark for week after week after week. It was very unpopular.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely used to go to work. I lived in Glasgow in sort of early part of this century. I used to go to work in the dark, and I used to leave the office sort of mid-afternoon in the dark, and quite often during the day it never got very light anyway.
But the great thing is, you see, is that because of the weakening of the European Union and its control over us, the whole thing can now be re-examined and come to an end. We used to have to, under European law, put our clocks forward and backwards on the 2 dates in March and October. Every country in the European Union used to have to do that. That's now been dropped. That rule is gone. We don't have to do it at all. But
they're already an hour ahead of us anyway.
But that's another question. That's their business. They're foreign. But the real difficulty is, and the real opportunity is, getting people to understand how important it is that when we do abandon this silliness, we fix the clocks where they ought to be.
Yes.
Time is natural. Noon is a real event. Noon is the point at which the sun strikes the bit of the earth that you're on at a certain angle. It's not made up. If you have a time system which pretends that noon happened an hour ago, or that it will happen in an hour, you're lying. You're making up. Why not have the natural time for the place where you live?
Well,
wouldn't that make sense?
Well, you would think, but maybe then you would have to have increments of noon, then, wouldn't you? You'd have to go. You wouldn't have a time zone. Say, for example, in Paris, for example, if they're an hour ahead of us, I'm sure noon is not an hour later there, is it?
Well, this is the time zones make perfect sense, and they were devised at the end of the 19th century because of railway timetables, and of course then when broadcasting and air travel came in, they were equally vital, because you have to have within reason an area around a meridian in which the same time is kept, and that's a sensible compromise. But why on earth would you come up with a scheme whereby people in London live on the time in Berlin, which is what would happen if we had the clocks set permanently an hour forwards. People in Spain have for many, many years lived on Berlin time, particularly ridiculously. You know why?
Because they're in the European Union?
No, because General Franco, who was a great fan of Adolf Hitler, introduced German time to Madrid in the 1930s to suck up to the Führer. And they've never abandoned it. Portugal next door didn't do the same thing, and then they tried it. And it was so horrible that they gave it up after 5 years.
Yes, because Portugal, I think, is the same time as us, right?
Yes, it is, because it should be. You look at a map, the lines of longitude go...
But Spain isn't.
No, Spain being on Berlin time is particularly ridiculous.
Yeah. And also,
one of the reasons why they eat at such odd times.
When you go the other way, it doesn't sort of compute, does it? Because I remember when I lived in America, as I'm sure you do, when you were crossing various time zones, it became quite confusing, because there was some... And in fact, there was a great story, wasn't there, a couple of New Years ago, where a specific Pacific island decided that they no longer wanted to be in the time zone they were in, because they preferred to be in the Australian time zone, because they wanted to do more business with them. So they immediately just missed out the hour of midnight on New Year's Eve. So it meant they didn't have New Year.
Well, that must have been... I can't remember the name of the... I think it must have been a blow.
I think it was Vanuatu or something like that.
There are some states, I think, when you are crossing over the Hoover Dam, if you go eastwards out of Las Vegas, you run into a very strange time anomaly.
Yeah, there's a place that's like 2.5 hours different from New York.
But the states can do what they like, and a lot of American states are now doing what I suggest, which is going back to natural time. There's some others not. But I only understand all this, and as I say, it's become people accuse me of being obsessed with it. I'm actually interested in it.
I think it's a very interesting subject.
Well, I think what's fascinating about it is the willingness of people to do as they're told without thinking.
Also, time is something that is not really explainable to people, because it's a concept, a construct.
It's not, you see.
Well,
it's a real thing. It's simply a measurement of something which happens. The planet revolves in 24 hours.
Right.
You could divide that up into 48 Gimbeks or
yes, 240. But that's what I mean, in terms of what time it is.
It takes that length of time to revolve. That's what we're measuring.
Right.
And that's when I flew backwards across the international date line.
Yeah.
As I did in 1992, I think it was, then I realised for the first time exactly what was going on. Because I left Siberia.
Yeah.
I left Siberia on Monday morning and arrived in Alaska the previous Sunday afternoon.
Right.
It makes you think.
It does.
I recommend it to anybody.
I used to pose this question when I did my overnight show, and there was a lot of time to fill.
Yeah.
And I used to get people to ring in. If you took Concorde from London to New York and you just kept taking it, would you eventually catch up with yesterday? Because when you would leave London at, say, 9... I think it was a 3-hour flight. 5-hour time difference. So you would get there 2 hours before you left, technically, in terms of time. So if you kept going, would you somehow come back on yourself?
The only time I took Concorde West was Washington, D.C. I seem to remember we arrived pretty much about the same time as we'd left.
Right.
So it was lunchtime when we left.
So if you left at 9 a.m. London time, that would be 4 a.m. New York. So you would arrive at 7. Actually, right? Yeah. So you'd arrive 2 hours before you left.
Yeah.
That's why I wondered if you could ever actually go all the way around and come back before you went.
Well, you'd have to ask Albert Einstein about that aspect of
it.
But
unfortunately, he wasn't available.
What I can tell you is that if you fly from Siberia to Alaska, you do go back a day.
And what's the effect on your body clock then?
I don't really know. I just finished 2.5 years in the Soviet Union, and I left.
You're just glad to get anywhere.
The back entrance, and the moment I got off the plane in Nome, Alaska, I went to a wonderful place called Fat Fred's Diner, where I had the sort of meal you could not get anywhere in the USSR. Right. And so, whatever effects it may have had on me, I don't know. Right. But I was just enjoying myself.
Yes, very good. Let's talk about something other than the clocks. Let's talk about East Germany.
Well, yes, I wrote a review this last weekend of a book by Katja Hoyer, a German historian who I think now lives in this country and is bilingual, which she's written about the country of her birth, called Beyond the Wall. And it's a fantastic book. I recommend it to anybody, but I disagree with it quite a lot, because the thing about Katja Hoyer is that she was born in East Germany. Her father was in the East German Air Force. But it collapsed when she was 4. Right. Whereas I used to go there quite a lot as an adult, and I remember it well, and how fascinating it always was, but also how very nasty it was. You couldn't take that trip, which I used to do on the S-Bahn, the overground railway in Berlin, to Friedrichstrasse station, through the border with the watchtowers and the dogs and
the checkpoints.
You could not. And when you got to Friedrichstrasse, there were actually border troops with submachine guns standing up in the galleries of the station. There was a whole air of menace. And then you walked out, having finally got through passport control and been forced to change your money into the East German funny money. You walked out, and the air was different. Right. It stank of brown coal and two-stroke exhaust. Right. And the air of East Berlin, indeed of East Germany in general, was a sort of grey-brown tinge on everything. And it just felt like a completely different world. It was amazing to go so rapidly from West Berlin, which was...
And literally just across the street.
Oh, it really was no distance at all. You just came out of this tunnel after having gone through and stepped out into Friedrichstrasse itself. It's another world. And it was... the funny thing about it is that politically correct people in the West now are beginning to make excuses for it, because one of the things it did was it achieved, I think, the highest ever level of female employment in any country in the world. They got it up to 90% of women were actually working in factories or offices for a wage instead of at home. And an awful lot of Western liberal reformers think this is terrific. And Katja Hoyer herself goes on a bit about how women were, I'm trying to remember the phrase, perhaps I think had more opportunities in East Germany than their Western sisters or stuff. Well, they had to have more opportunities because they were forced pretty much out to work, because the country had, as most of those countries did, a labour shortage.
And did it have one of those economies where if you did take money in, you weren't allowed to take it out?
Oh, that was definitely the case, yes. I mean, you were forced to take the money in and you had to spend it there. Right. If you... I never did, but if you changed money illegally there, you could get into very big trouble. They have one of the things, one weird memory, there was a shop on the Schönhauser Allee which sold the most beautiful toy trains. They made really, really good toy trains. And it was so tempting because they were priced in East German marks, which if you had changed them on the black market would have meant you could get an entire train set for about 20 quid. The temptation to buy it all up and cart it back through the border was huge, but you would have just been caught because you couldn't conceivably have had that much money. Right. So yes, it was very much closed. They lived better than a lot of the Eastern European countries. Some people quite liked it. Some people still do. I mean, there's this famous nostalgia, and a lot of the older people say, well, it was more orderly, and people would behave better towards each other, and all that kind of stuff. And there is some truth in it, because East Germany, after the wall fell, was just wiped out. All the factories closed, all the workplaces closed, everybody lost their jobs, everybody lost their status, whatever it was.
And it didn't become like West Germany, did it?
Oh no, it didn't. They spent a lot of money. They spent a fortune. Some of the East German towns now are absolutely beautiful because they were historically lovely, but have fallen into decay, and now they're really nice. But the point is that it's been on my mind for some time that East Germany is a sort of hate figure among nations because of the Stasi secret police and the Berlin Wall and people being shot trying to get out, which is all true. But now people are beginning to say, well, actually, maybe there were some good points, and I think we have to watch out for that.
Yes,
because I don't think they were. I think if you look at a society and say, well, that was good because they had lots of women in work. So, well, why was it good that they had lots of women in work? In West Germany, at the same time, very much the opposite view was taken. The women who went out to work when they could have been raising their own children were actually rather criticised as Raven mothers, Ravensmutter. And I personally think that the constant pressure in our society on women to go out to work and the denigration and scorn poured upon people who raise their own children is a mistake. And actually, raising children is a fantastically skilled and responsible occupation.
It is.
And we take people away from it and make them go, and if they're going to go and be bosses of major corporations or high court judges, well, okay, great. But most women don't become high court judges or bosses of major corporations when they go out to work. That's not what they do. And a lot of them don't earn enough to pay for the childcare they then have to provide. So I wouldn't say East Germany was that much of a model, but that's where I took... that's where I disagreed with Katja Hoyer, is that she's more sympathetic to some aspects of that society.
But nostalgia often is rather rose-tinted, isn't it? When you look
but in
back
her
on
case,
things.
you see, it's one of the incidents in the book. She actually describes how her father was taking part in some huge parade, and he made a joke about how much trouble they'd be in if they got it wrong on the parade, and for making that joke, he was arrested that night and put in the cells. It was her own father. And it's an extraordinary story in the book, which I haven't. The other reviewers don't seem to have mentioned it, but it seems to me to be an amazing thing in your family history for your father to say, well, I was actually arrested for making a joke by the regime. That's the kind of place it was. Whatever its policy towards women may have been, I don't think you ever...
And I wonder if we can draw that parallel...
That.
I'm trying to find, as we speak, so apologies for looking down at what I'm looking at here, but I'm trying to find, I can't find it, a piece that was written this weekend about the new kind of establishment that you talked about many moons ago, having been created by the sort of Blair administration, and the fact that we now live in this kind of woke society where the establishment is more left than right. Because these are the children of Tony Blair, effectively, the people who have been to university, who have been... who have become quite hard line about what it is they believe in.
Oh, very much so, and not at all merciful or tolerant towards anybody who disagrees with them. And this is the legacy of 1968, or everything. 1968, students rioting on the streets of Paris, the Prague Spring and everything else, all sunshine and love. Actually, the ideology that came out of 68 is pretty hard line, and if as long as you do what it tells you to do, that's fine.
Right.
But if you dissent from it in any way, they come down on you quite hard.
Yes, because funnily enough, we talked about this, didn't we, last week, about this idea of giving childcare free to people all through all sorts of generational periods. And that was when East Germany sort of came up. It's almost as though we're revisiting it.
Well, it's because it is one of the biggest subjects, actually, in modern society and politics. It's completely changed the way people live.
Yes. Finally, hostility to Iran. You talked about on the weekend.
I went. I was very lucky a few years ago. I went to Iran on a trip with my friend Jason Rezaian, who's a fantastic American-Iranian journalist who wanted at that time to try and change the silly Western perceptions of Iran. And I went. He has family there. I went and visited people in their homes. I've met a lot of Iranians and found how fantastically pro-Western a lot of them are. And how close it comes, rare in that part of the world, to being a real civil society, as well as being a very beautiful place, and one which I long to go back to, but I can't, because my friend Jason, shortly after I went there with him, was arrested and accused of spying.
Goodness.
Totally falsely, and his wife as well, and they were thrown into solitary confinement. And ultimately, basically, he was ransomed out. What they had done was taken him as a hostage.
Right.
And so, two things I learned about Iran. One, it wasn't what we're all told it was. Two, that it still does have an immensely sinister and ruthless ruling regime, which I would like to undermine. But I don't think that the hostility of the West to Iran has successfully undermined that regime. In fact, I got the strong impression when I was there that the Revolutionary Guard and the Ayatollahs all actually fed on the world's hostility. They liked it because they could say to their people, look, the West threatens us all the time. They sanction you. And the hostility of the West, I think, helps maintain that regime, and we would be much better off dropping the sanctions, opening up as much as we possibly could. That would undermine that regime, and if we did undermine that regime and Iran became even relatively free, it would be a really great thing for Iran and for the world. And I just think we should be less... And the thing about this Apple TV series, Tehran, is that it portrays Iranians as human, and I think it's very important. And people should remember they're not all people.
I think that's generally a good thing. So I suppose the Israelis would object, though, to
well, I don't know.
humanising the Iranian regime.
Ultimately, it's an Israeli-made program, like the fascinating other great Israeli TV series Fauda.
Fauda's fantastic,
it's
isn't it?
Really good, and again, it's
terrifying,
successful because again, it portrays Arabs as human beings with normal emotions and sometimes in the right. Yeah. There's some very good TV coming out of Israel at the moment, which tells you something about what kind of society it is.
Indeed. Well, Peter, we're out of time, sadly, but thank you very much indeed.